Hello, and welcome to The Forgotten King, an audio drama presented by Story Games. Let's tell a story.
In Thario's mind, there was nothing quite so lovely or familiar as the smell of hay and dirt, chopped wood and pig slop. On their own, those smells were nothing that spectacular, but together, almost like a symphony for the nose, they came together to form a scent that made him think of a farm. For the longest time it was he, his father and his mother. But then she had gone on to Shire above some time ago, at least 10 years now. And the small plot of land he and his father tilled and worked was more than just a home. It was his whole world. Insofar as a life might be concerned, he was just fine. No real qualms for him to worry over. No excitement to turn his stomach in knots and keep sleep from his resting hours. Life had become a series of early mornings, caring for the animals of the farm. They were he and his father's food, so he loved them fiercely. He'd spend nights around a fire listening to his dad tell adventure stories from his time in battle during the Great War of the Second Age, called the Turning. He always loved the smell of tobacco burning in his father's long pipe. The smell kept him present, kept him at home. And in truth, at his core, that was how he preferred things. Knights and maidens, castles and city folk, all of that was better left far away, tucked into the fold of Father Tech's time in another place, for other people to get mixed up in. Aside from the farm, his deepest love was books. Scrolls from the Sandspire in Naros, Nither-in journals from his mother, a conjurer's tome from Greenbarrow, a cookbook from the White Stag Inn. In fact, any task, menial or meaningful, simply couldn't keep his attention if his eyes and mind's eye had grabbed hold of a book. Was it just the words? The black ink on the pages? They acted like tiny ships whisking him into worlds unknown, or diving south into the minds of the great thinkers of the past. Maybe it was because he felt the safest wrapped in a book. Or then again, could it just be the smell? The indescribable scent of wood-turned paper, or the faint perfume the ink left on the page. Whatever it was that made him love books so, the one thing that Thario was sure of was that they held all he needed to live a satisfied life. Enough food, adventure, love and drama for several lifetimes over, in fact. And thus the company of people, his age or otherwise, never really held his fancy. For Thario, a perfect day was a warm spot of sunlit hay up in the roof of the barn, a cool breeze coming in through the open window, an apple or handful of nuts to keep him nourished, and all the time the day would allow for him to lose himself between the pages of a new book. His father would often find him there. "Come on, boy. There's earth to till and seeds to plant. Get down off of the rafters, and wherever it is you go in those books." His father was a simple man, with simple wants and needs, never one to overly express his emotions, never one to show any shade of feeling at all, really. Maybe that's what happens when you give your heart to another, and they die before you. You're left as a shell of what you once were. A capsule of flesh and bone, walking and talking, with its soul attached to the one it was meant to spend forever with. This didn't mean Thario didn't love his father. He knew his father loved him, and that the world was safe and stable with him in it. But it saddened him to know that his father was tormented so deeply. He'd hear him at night, when he thought Thario was asleep, stifling his cries into a blanket. He wondered how many people in the world lived in such a way, wearing masks of stone smiles during the day, just to let their inner demons walk around and emote at night. deep wounds often need bandages. A mask is as good a bandage as any. "Write down, Dat," was Thario's standard reply when his father called. And Thario was never one for backtalk or quarrel. In fact, the second a hint of conflict would arise, he'd feel his stomach turn and an undeniable need to make his departure, as if some haunted ghost were pulling his shirt away from the conflict, physical or verbal. That, and his dad was right. It was Halmon, the 9th and penultimate month of the calendar year. The weather would soon turn. From the warm, sticky, final heat of the summer to the crisp, biting air of the fall, and the soil would turn, rejecting the seeds they planted. It was the morning next week, the time of year in Eldaron where loved ones who had passed on to Shire, Otek, or Manon were remembered. It was always a hard time for his father. So, with a huff and a sigh, he placed the strap of linen he used to mark his spot in the book, rolled and made his way down the ladder, exited the loft, and thudded onto the dirt floor of the barn. He'd built the ladder, or rebuilt the ladder, last summer during Hymen, just after harvest. The rungs of the old one gave out after decades of use. He only had an hour to himself each day, just after lunch and right before the evening session of farm work he and his father managed. He'd gone and taken 2 hours. But as it was the 10th day in a row with such a routine, there was no doubt his father allowed his son some extra time. It was not uncommon for Thario to take the extra time, and it was not uncommon for his father to scold him about it. "You spend too much time in those books," his father mused as he threw Thario a shovel and they headed to the northeast portion of their plot, at the base of the small mountains. It was time to seed the green cumbers, runions, carrots and bell plants they'd be using the following year for stews. "Nothing will come of it but headaches and a blurred vision." "You have experience with books?" Thario playfully retorted. "Enough to know their shortcomings." "What's the worst book you've ever read then?" "Oh, can't rightly say I've ever finished one." "Then how do you know they're all so bad for you?" His father tossed that around in his head for a moment. "Why read when you can do? I know you're wiser than me, Da, but I think you may be wrong about the benefits of reading." His father trudged on, boots pounding the earth like a bull. "Just don't leave all your adventure into books, is all I'm saying. I'll not let you spend your whole life here with me, trapped in those pages you're always turning. There are places to see that make our farm look like a pebble in a stream." "I have nowhere else to go." Thario let the thought twist in his mind like a question. "Where would I possibly go?" His father turned then, stopping suddenly as if a great shade of anger had flashed in his mind. "It doesn't matter as much where you go as that you go. You may not even like where you end up. It may smell different. The food may taste different. The language and the people you meet won't look familiar. And the place you lay your head will feel like a prison in its own way. But you'll be better for it. I promise you. And when you come back here to our little farm and visit your mother and ours graves there, under the olive tree, you'll be a better man than when you left. And you can't have all of that happen in a book." It was rare that his father spoke more than a few words at a time, unless he was telling one of his war stories. Half the time it was one-word replies or non-verbal grunts. It left a pit in Thario's stomach to hear his dad speak with such sadness and vigour. "Do you not want me here with you, Da?" A tear threatened to wet Thario's eye. His father turned to him fully and held his dirt-caked, calloused hands out to his cheek. "The time we have had together, with and without your ma, has made it certain that no matter where you go, you'll always be here with me." He smiled. "You understand?" Thario did. Maybe not completely, but something deep inside his heart understood his father's words. His father gave his cheek a pat. "Now come on, we've squabbled away like two women in a market, and I'm not nearly as fast as I used to be." Thario raced ahead of his father, passing him with a laugh. "Oh, it's been years since you've lost your speed, old mule." He ran through the unplanted field as his father tried best to keep pace. Later, once they had tended to the livestock and bathed in the small river that cut through the field behind their cottage, they roasted a rabbit over the fire and washed it down with a mug of summer ale. The brew was golden and crisp, the rabbit buttery and lean, with hints of rosemary freshly picked from the garden outside the window. The meat accompanied the crisp potatoes and garlic perfectly. His father had let him drink ale going on 2 years now. At first it made Thario's head swim and his fingers numb. Now he could have 2 or 3 pints before he felt his legs wobble. "Did you prefer a sword or a spear?" Thario asked Cain, prying further into the memories of the Great War. A sword was easier to wield, more natural, like an extension of your own arm. A spear was long and cumbersome. It took 2 hands to thrust and manoeuvre, but it kept the grey skin of those whom Manon turned away from me. Like rabid dogs they were, full of anger and hate, nothing else. "Did you ever kill one?" Thario said, ale practically dripping from his mouth. "Aye, maybe 10 and 4. Plenty of my own licks to pay for it." "The scar on your arm?" Thario eyed the pink hairless stitch on his father's right arm. It ran from his elbow near to his thumb. His father studied it too. "Was a dirk. One of them ran it across my arm as I stuck my sword up into his neck and twisted. The last thing he did in the world was give me that cut." He lifted his tunic, exposing scar tissue the size of a robin's egg under his arm. "An arrow slipped through here. Didn't even know about that one till I got back to camp and realised I was bleeding all down my right side." "You didn't even know you'd been shot?" "Sometimes something happens to you in a battle. A sickness or a fever. Something that makes your senses dull. Your will to live brings the movement of your enemy into focus, like it's all that's left in the world. I saw men fight on well after they'd had a sword in their belly or an arrow in their lungs." "Did you ever fight near the king?" "Near enough. I could see him in his circle. His 2 sons, Rain and Gale. They were good fighters. Well learned, well armoured." "But Rain died, right? And the king?" "Aye, the king died. Odin. He'd been on the throne for nearly 50 years. His eldest son, Rain, was captured and taken from the battle. But Gale rallied the circle and the men, and we fought on to win that day. Finished the war, in a moment that could have just as easily been the end of Eldaron." "Where did they come from?" "Who?" "The people that turned." "I heard folk in my travels say they came from Nith, a beautiful city on the eastern end of the world. A castle by a beach, with a church of Shire more grand than any before it. And it fell. A darkness came over the people there and turned them into... Into what? The worst versions of themselves. The worst that all of us could be." He got lost in the thought for a moment. It was a long time ago, but that was all. His father stopped suddenly, head snapping to his left, lifting his ear to the window. "What is it?" Thario strained to hear. "A horse. Horses, coming up the path." "This late?" Thario looked puzzled, and his puzzlement grew even more when he heard raindrops fall onto the roof. "And is that rain?" A chill caught in the air. The fire seemed to cower in the fireplace from the change of atmosphere. A hush fell between them that was broken only by the sound of riders outside. A concerning amount at that, drowning out the fat drops splashing on the hay-shingled roof. His father stood, setting his pipe on the table beside him. Eyes wide, fingers spread, poised, just listening for a movement. Thario suddenly realised he was holding his breath. His father resolved something in his head, still listening, then whispered back at his son. "Do you remember the deer blind by the river, near the big rock?" Thario felt a tickle on his spine. Yes? Can you get to it in the dark? His father reached for the short sword over the fireplace, slowly taking it down and turning to his son. Oh yeah, but when I open the front door, you run out the back as fast as you can, and you don't look back, no matter what you see or hear. What do you mean? What are you going to do? Thario stood, worry crawling on his words. There's no matter of business those men want at this hour that is in our good interest. Shire willing I've made a mistake, and it's just a band of wayward travellers. But when you've seen the world like I have, you learn to smell trouble coming long before it's arrived. But Da, you remember what I said in the field today, about how you'll always be here, no matter where you go. Thario nodded as his father made for the front door. He could only watch. It'll also be true that no matter where you go, I'll be there with you. You hear me, boy? Thario felt a lump in his throat the size of a rock. I hear you, Da. I should have said I love you more times than I did. Made that same mistake with your mother, too. He put his large hand on the latch of the door. You are more like her than you'll ever know. All the good things, anyway. Thario felt his back hit the door behind him. He hadn't even realized he'd been walking backwards. It must have been the battle focus his father had been talking about just moments before. You run hard, Thario. Cain looked at his baby boy through pained eyes. But there was pride in there too. Like his father knew Thario was headed off to great things. Run hard and have a full life. His chin lowered as he summoned rage and courage into his blood. Promise me? I promise, Thario managed as his fingers slipped into the latch of the back door. Ready? His father steadied against the wood. Thario nodded, and he knew it would be the last time he would see his father. With a roar that would rival a mountain bear, his father pushed open the door and ran into the cold, wet night. For just a moment, half a breath at the most, just when a streak of lightning flashed in the sky behind them, Thario saw a group of 7 black cloaked riders cresting the top of the grassy hill in front of their cottage. The riders wore dark cowls and heavy leather vestments. Rain littered the sky around them like they were born from it. A faint red mist swirled hauntingly around their bodies. They were like mighty angels in a line. Dark iron swords drawn. 7 of them in total. Cain ran at them like they were the end of all things. The outcome would be left for Thario's dreams as he clenched the metal latch, pushed open the door, and raced for the safety of the woods. It wasn't the visual of the cloaked riders standing in the rain that would haunt his dreams that night, and for many nights to come. It was the deep voice that boomed from the darkness behind the men. It thundered like a wave, echoing into the sky. It pushed into and through Thario like a shadow of death. It left his heart pounding, his chest heaving. The words were boulders dropping from the sky, pounding the mud around him. Where is the king? It asked of Cain and of the world, and Thario sprinted into the trees, away from the horror, the noise, and the rain.
The Forgotten King was created and written by Michael Stagliano. Story by Michaela Oberhofer, El Silito, Matthew Pajad, Maisie Folk, Matthew O'Connell, and Stephen Stagliano. Voice narration by Kitty Liddon. Sound design and scoring by Chris Kirk. Produced by Greg Wood and Emil Hanton.